Sheriff Wade and 12 gunmen surrounded them. They'd come to arrest Joe for murder, a death sentence waiting. Joe lowered her rifle. "All right, I'll go." But Sam grabbed her arm. In front of all those lawmen and hired guns, he did the unthinkable. He kissed her, fierce, desperate, like a declaration of war. When they broke apart, Sam turned to Wade. "She's not going with you. Not now. Not ever. You want her? You go through me." Wade stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "You're a damn fool, Calloway." Wouldn't be the first time someone said that. Then Wade turned his horse. But this was only the beginning. Wyoming, 1871. This is the story of the giant widow the whole town feared, and the only man who dared to stand beside her. The wind on the high plains did not just blow, it hunted. It scoured the earth with a jealous hollow scream, stripping warmth from stone and moisture from soil. The sky above Wyoming territory hung the color of a bruised iron skillet, heavy and low, pressing down on flat miles of short grass that stretched toward a horizon never seeming to get closer. The air smelled of metallic dust and the sharp coppery bite of snow waiting just behind the cloud bank, ready to bury the world. In the yard of a weathered homestead, a woman stood before a massive chopping block. The axe in her hands rose and fell with rhythmic violence, each strike sending the steel blade through heartwood with a crack that echoed across the empty land. She was not a small woman. Even from a distance, the sheer scale of her was unmistakable. She stood 6 feet tall if she was an inch broad in the shoulders, with a back as straight and unyielding as a fence post. She wore a man's heavy coat that strained at the seams, a battered hat pulled low over dark hair wound tight against her skull. She split wood like she was trying to split the world in two. Her name was Josephine Ashford, though most called her Jo, and she had lived alone on this land for 3 years. 3 years of peace, she told herself. 3 years without a man's voice raised in anger. 3 years without flinching at the sound of boots on floorboards. The axe came down again. The log surrendered, falling in 2 clean pieces. Behind her, the homestead told its own story. The barn leaned slightly westward, half the shingles stripped away by wind that never stopped. The corral fence sagged at drunken angles patched with driftwood and rusted wire. In the small pasture beyond, perhaps 30 head of cattle huddled in the lee of a windbreak, their breath steaming in air that had turned knife-sharp. And there, just beyond the garden patch where dead cornstalks rattled like bones, stood a grave. Fresh earth raw and ugly against white snow beginning to dust the ground. A wooden cross at the head, weathered gray, no name carved into it. Just wood. Just silence. Jo set another log on the block. She raised the axe muscles coiling beneath the heavy coat. As she brought the blade down, a gust of wind hit her sideways, strong enough to make her stagger. The axe bit deep, but crooked wedging in the wood. She yanked it free, cursing under her breath. That was when she heard it, the scrape of boot on stone loud in the momentary lull between gusts. Jo spun the axe coming up in a smooth defensive arc. She did not look frightened. She looked dangerous. Her eyes, dark and guarded, scanned the yard searching for the source of the sound. Her jaw set in a hard line. At the corner of her mouth, just visible beneath the shadow of her hat brim, ran a small scar, white against weathered skin, old but permanent. For 3 seconds she saw nothing. The wind howled. Snow began to fall in earnest, now fat flakes that dissolved on impact. Then movement caught her eye. Near the gate a horse stood, riderless reins trailing in the dirt. The animal was a sturdy bay gelding, its sides heaving, white rings of panic showing around its eyes. Beyond the horse, half hidden in the shadow of a tumbleweed pile, lay a man. Jo did not move. Not yet. She had learned caution the hard way. The last man she had helped, the last man she had opened her door to, had nearly killed her. But the wind gusted again, brutal and arctic, and the man on the ground did not move. Snow began to settle on his back, on the dark wool of his coat, on the battered crown of his hat. If he stayed there, he would die. The blue norther was not forgiving. It took the weak and left them frozen solid eyes still open, staring at nothing. Jo took a step forward, then another. The axe remained raised. She reached the man and knelt, keeping the blade between them. Up close she could see blood. It matted his hair on the left side, dark and wet, running down to soak the collar of his shirt. His face was turned away from her, pressed against frozen earth. His breathing came shallow and hitched. She reached out with her free hand and grabbed his shoulder, rolling him onto his back. His head lolled. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused, the pale gray of old flint. He tried to speak, but the words came out garbled, meaningless. Joe's hand tightened on the axe handle. She looked at his face. Weathered, lined, honest, if such a thing could be read in features. 30, maybe a little older. Not young enough to be reckless. Not old enough to be resigned. She looked at the blood. Head wound. Bad, but not fatal if treated. She looked at the sky. The snow was coming faster now, the temperature dropping by the minute. She looked back at the man. He tried to focus on her. His eyes tracked to the axe in her hand. Fear flickered across his face. He tried to move, to crawl backward, but his body would not obey. Joe made a sound low in her throat. Not quite a sigh, not quite a growl. She stood slinging the axe over her shoulder and bent to hook her arms under his. He was heavy as a dead steer. She grunted with effort, her boots digging into the frozen ground as she hauled him upright. His weight sagged against her, but she was strong. She had always been strong. It was both blessing and curse. She dragged him toward the house. His boots scraped twin trails in the dirt. The dogs, 2 lean mutts that lived under the porch, began barking. She kicked the cabin door open with her boot and hauled the stranger over the threshold. Inside the cabin was sparse. No rugs, no curtains, no softened edges. It was a room built for survival, not comfort. A cast-iron stove dominated the center, radiating fierce heat. The floor was swept clean enough to eat off. On a high shelf alone and gathering no dust lay a photograph frame turned face down. On the wall near the door hung a Winchester rifle within easy reach. Joe dropped the man onto the floorboards near the stove. He groaned, rolling onto his back. She bolted the door against the wind, then turned and stripped off her heavy coat. Underneath she wore a simple work dress of gray wool patched at the elbows. The dress did nothing to hide the power of her frame. Her arms were thick with muscle that rippled as she moved. Her hands were large, the knuckles slightly swollen from labor, the skin chapped and raw. She knelt beside the man and began stripping off his wet layers. His coat, his vest, his shirt soaked through with melted snow and blood. His skin beneath was pale cold to the touch. She saw scars there, old ones, a puckered line across his ribs that looked like saber work, burn marks on his forearm, the body of a man who had seen violence. She heated water on the stove and returned with a basin and clean rags. She washed the blood from his face. The gash on his head was deep, running from hairline to temple. It would need stitching. She poured whiskey over the wound. The man hissed through clenched teeth, his hands gripping the table leg until his knuckles went white. Joe threaded a needle, passing it through the flame of a lantern. As she leaned in to begin stitching, she spoke for the first time. Her voice was rough, shaped by wind and silence. "Hold still. This will hurt." The man opened his eyes and looked at her. Really looked. His gaze traveled over her face, taking in the hard angles, the set of her jaw, the scar at the corner of her mouth. He looked at her shoulders, her arms the size of her. She watched his expression, waiting for the inevitable reaction, the recoil, the disgust, the fear. But it did not come. He just nodded once, a small movement, and closed his eyes again. Joe began to stitch. Her hands were large, the knuckles swollen, but they were steady. She pulled skin together and drove the needle through. The man flinched but did not cry out. She worked in silence, each stitch precise and even. As she worked, she became aware of him tracking her breathing. Every time her thumb brushed his forehead, she felt a faint tremor in her fingers, a hum of tension that contradicted the stony expression on her face. She tied off the last stitch and bit the thread with her teeth. "Done." The man opened his eyes again. He looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable passing across his face. Then he spoke, his voice rough as gravel rattling in a tin can. "Thank you, ma'am. I would have died out there." Joe stood abruptly, moving away from him. She dumped the bloody water into a slop bucket, scrubbing at her hands as if the blood were something poisonous. "Rest. There is a blanket in the corner. You sleep there." She pointed to the far side of the room, away from the bed, pushed against the wall. Do not come near the bed. Understand?" The man tried to sit up, wincing as the movement pulled at his wound. "I can pay you for the trouble." Joe turned on him, her eyes flashing. "I do not want your money tonight. I want you to sleep. In the morning, when the storm breaks, you leave. You take your horse and you go." The man looked at her. He saw the wall she had built around herself, higher and thicker than the walls of the cabin. He saw the way she held herself coiled tight, ready to strike or flee. "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. He crawled to the corner where a buffalo hide and wool blanket lay. He wrapped himself up the heat of the stove, fighting the chill in his bones. He watched her for a long time. She sat at the table with her back to him, staring at the dark window. She did not move. She sat like a sentry, keeping watch over an empty fort, waiting for an enemy that might already be inside the walls. Outside, the wind screamed. Inside, silence pressed down heavy as stone. The man's eyes drifted closed. In the space between waking and sleep, he murmured words Joe could not quite catch. Names, maybe. Sarah. Clara. A third name unfamiliar. Then silence. Joe sat unmoving at the table. Her hands lay flat on the scarred wood palms down. In the low light of the dying lantern, those hands looked enormous, capable of splitting logs, of dragging a grown man through snow, of ending a life if necessary. She stared at them as if they belonged to someone else. After a long time, she whispered into the darkness, so quiet the wind almost stole the words. "Don't get used to him. Don't." But even as she said it, she knew it was already too late. The stranger had crossed her threshold. The wall had cracked just a little, and walls once cracked never quite hold the same way again. Morning broke with a silence that was deafening after the roar of the storm. The wind had finally died, leaving behind a world encased in ice. Every surface glittered under pale winter sun. The fence posts wore caps of white. The dead cornstalks stood frozen in place like a ghostly army. The sky had cleared to a hard, bright blue that hurt to look at. Joe woke before dawn, as she always did. She rose from her bed and dressed quickly in the cold, pulling on layers of wool and canvas. She stoked the stove-added wood and put a pot of coffee on the iron plate. Only then did she allow herself to look at the corner where the stranger slept. He was awake, sitting up with his back against the wall, one hand pressed to his head. He looked terrible. His face was gray, his eyes sunken and rimmed with shadow. But he was conscious. That was something. Joe poured 2 cups of coffee and carried one to him. She set it on the floor within reach, then retreated to the table. They drank in silence, the bitter black liquid scalding their throats. After a time the man spoke. "Name's Samuel Calloway. Most call me Sam." Joe did not answer immediately. She looked at him over the rim of her cup, measuring. "Joe?" she said finally. "Josephine Ashford." Sam nodded as if filing the information away. He took another sip of coffee, then set the cup down carefully. "How bad is it? The storm damage?" "Bad enough." Sam pushed himself to his feet, swaying slightly. Joe started to rise, but he held up a hand. "I'm steady. Just need a minute." He walked to the window and looked out. From where Joe sat, she could see his profile, the hard line of his jaw, the way his shoulders set square and solid despite the injury. He was not a big man by frontier standards, maybe 5'10", lean and whipcord tough, but there was something in the way he carried himself, a quiet competence, a refusal to bend. "Fence is down in 3 places," he said. "Barn roof looks ready to cave on the north side. You got cattle scattered to hell and back." Joe's jaw tightened. She knew all this. She had seen it yesterday before the storm hit, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real in a way that twisted something in her chest. "I will manage." Sam turned to look at her. "I'm sure you will. But it'd go faster with 2. You said yourself the storm is over. You can ride out." "My horse is lame. Saw her favoring the left foreleg last night before I passed out. She needs rest. Few days at least." Joe stood her chair, scraping loud against the floor. "I cannot pay a hand. I have barely enough for winter as it is." Sam met her eyes. His were the color of old flint, hard and unreadable. But there was something else there, too, something that looked almost like understanding. "I do not want wages. I will work for my keep. You gave me shelter. You stitched my head. Let me earn the debt." "There is no debt. There is to me." They stared at each other across the small room. Joe's hands curled into fists at her sides. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to send him away the moment his horse could walk. Men were danger, men were pain, men took and took until there was nothing left to give. But she looked at the work ahead. The fence that needed mending before the cattle drifted too far. The roof that would collapse under the next snow. The posts that needed resetting before the ground froze harder. It was a two-person job minimum. She had been trying to do it alone for 3 years, and the ranch showed the strain. Pride was a warm coat, but you could not eat it. 3 days, she said, her voice hard as the frozen ground outside. You fix what needs fixing, then you go. Sam nodded. Deal. Joe turned away before he could see the slump in her shoulders, before he could see the small, treacherous spark of relief that flared in her chest. 3 days. She could manage 3 days. She pulled her coat from the peg and headed for the door. As she opened it, cold air rushing in, she spoke without looking back. Barn is that way. You sleep there starting tonight. I will bring blankets. She stepped out into the brilliant frozen morning and closed the door behind her. Sam stood alone in the cabin, the scent of coffee and wood smoke hanging in the air. He looked around the spare room, taking in the details Joe probably thought he had missed. The rifle always within reach. The photograph frame turned face down. The way the floorboards near the bed were worn smooth, as if she paced there at night unable to sleep. The absence of any softness, any comfort, any sign that this was a home rather than a fortress. He walked to the window and watched her cross the yard. She moved with purpose, her stride long and sure despite the ice. She did not look back. Sam touched the stitches on his head gently. They pulled tight, but held. Good work. Steady hands despite the tremor he had felt, despite the fear she tried so hard to hide. He had been running for 3 years, running from a courthouse in Kansas where he had failed to save a woman who needed saving, running from the guilt that sat like stones in his gut, running from the memory of his wife Sarah and daughter Clara, buried under 6 feet of Kansas dirt beside a river whose name he did not know. He had told himself he was looking for redemption. But maybe what he was really looking for was a place to stop running, a reason to stand and fight. He looked at the grave visible through the window, the unmarked cross, the raw earth. "Who is in the ground, Joe?" he murmured to the empty room. "And why do they still have you so scared?" Outside, Joe walked to the barn. The structure listed dangerously, the north side sagging under the weight of neglect. She pushed open the heavy door and stepped into the dim interior. The smell of hay and horse and leather wrapped around her. In the stalls, her 2 remaining horses stamped and nickered. Sam's bay gelding stood in the corner head down, left foreleg cocked to take weight off the hoof. Joe moved through the familiar space, checking water, forking hay, her hands working automatically while her mind churned. 3 days. She had given him 3 days. She tried to calculate the risk. He was injured, which made him less dangerous, but he was also a man alone, which made him unpredictable. She knew nothing about him except that he had appeared out of a storm and nearly died on her land. He could be anyone, running from anything, but she knew the look of violence. She had lived with it for long enough to recognize the signs, and whatever scars Sam Calloway carried, whatever violence had marked his body, she did not sense that cruelty in him. Not the kind that took pleasure in causing pain, not the kind that twisted love into something ugly. Still, 3 years ago she would have said the same about Frank. In the beginning, Joe's hand stilled on the pitchfork. She stood in the half-darkness of the barn, surrounded by the quiet breathing of animals, and let herself remember, just for a moment. Just long enough to remind herself why the walls were necessary. Frank Ashford had been a big man, not tall but broad, thick through the chest and shoulders, strong hands that could gentle a spooked horse or break a fence post with equal ease. When they had married, she had been 19 and desperate, an orphan with no prospects and no family. He had offered stability, a home, a name. The first time he hit her, it had been almost apologetic, a backhand across the mouth when she had let the stew burn. He had said he was sorry, said he had been drinking, said it would not happen again. It happened again, and again. The fists became routine. The words became weapons sharper than any blade. He told her she was too big, too ugly, too much of everything wrong and not enough of anything right. He told her she should be grateful he had married her at all, that no other man would have her. He told her she was a freak of nature, a mistake God had made and forgotten to fix. And then he began to mark her, to make sure she never forgot. Joe's hand moved unconsciously to her shoulder, to the place beneath her dress where the worst of the scars lay hidden. Cigarette burns, knife cuts, bones broken and reset wrong, a map of cruelty written on her skin. The town had known. Of course they had known. But a man's home was his castle, and what happened behind closed doors was not the law's concern. Especially when the man in question was well-liked, a successful rancher, and the woman was strange. Too tall, too strong, too silent. When Frank died, they had looked at her with suspicion rather than sympathy. They had whispered that she must have killed him, that she had finally snapped and murdered her husband in cold blood, that her size and strength made her dangerous, unnatural a threat. They had no proof. The doctor had ruled it an accident. A fall in the barn, a blow to the head on the anvil. Tragic, but not criminal. Only Joe knew the truth. Only Joe knew that Frank had come home drunk that night, that he had cornered her in the barn with a pitchfork handle raised, that they had fought and he had slipped and his head had struck iron with a sound like a melon splitting. Only Joe knew that she had stood over him watching the blood pool beneath his skull and felt nothing but relief. She had not struck the killing blow, but she had not helped him either. She had watched him die. And in the eyes of the law, in the eyes of God, if such a thing existed, that might be the same as murder. Joe shook herself, pushing the memories back down where they belonged. Buried. Forgotten. The past was dead. Frank was dead. She had survived. That was all that mattered. She finished with the horses and headed back to the house. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Through the window she could see Sam moving around inside, awkward but trying. When she entered, she found him at the stove attempting to fry eggs in a cast-iron skillet. He looked up as she came in sheepish. "Thought I would make myself useful." Joe looked at the eggs. They were a mess. Overcooked on one side, raw on the other. But the gesture itself was unexpected. Frank had never cooked, never cleaned, never lifted a finger in the house. That was woman's work, he had said. Beneath him. "Sit," Joe said, "before you burn down what I have left." Sam obeyed, a small smile touching his mouth. Joe took over at the stove, scraping the ruined eggs into the slop bucket and starting fresh. She worked efficiently, the motions automatic. Eggs, cornbread from yesterday, coffee, simple fare but hot and filling. They ate in silence. Joe watched Sam from the corner of her eye. He ate with the focused intensity of a man who had known real hunger. He cleaned his plate, sopping up the last of the egg with bread, and when he finished, he looked at her. "That was good. Thank you." Joe nodded. She stood and began clearing the dishes. Sam rose too, reaching for his plate. Their hands brushed. Joe jerked back as if burned. Sam froze, his expression carefully neutral. He set the plate down gently and stepped away, hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Sorry. Did not mean to crowd you." Joe's heart hammered in her chest. Her breath came too fast. She forced herself to slow it, to breathe deep, to push down the panic that surged like a wave. "The rule," she set her voice tight. "Do not touch me unless it is life or death. Understand?" Sam held her gaze. Understood. He turned and walked to the door, pulling on his coat. "I will start on the fence. You have wire and posts. In the barn, west corner." Sam nodded and left, closing the door quietly behind him. Joe stood alone in the cabin, her hands shaking. She gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles went white until the shaking stopped. She hated this, hated the way her body betrayed her, flinching at shadows, jumping at sounds. She had fought so hard to be strong, to be unbreakable. But some things once broken never quite healed right. She finished the dishes and dressed for outside work. Heavy coat, hat, gloves. She was reaching for the door when she noticed something on the table. The coffee cups washed and set to dry. Sam's work. Small, unnecessary, but done. Joe looked at the cups for a long moment. Then she grabbed her hat and headed out to help with the fence. The day passed in hard labor. The ground was frozen solid, making every strike of the post hole digger a battle. They worked side by side, Joe and Sam speaking only when necessary. He pointed, she handed him wire. She held the post steady, he tamped the earth. Slowly the fence began to take shape. Straight, strong, built to last. By midday they had reset 2 posts and restrung a section of wire. Joe's hands were raw despite the gloves. Sam's head wound had begun seeping again, a thin line of blood visible at his hairline. But neither of them stopped. There was too much to do, and winter did not wait. It was Joe who finally called a halt. "Water break." They sat on a fallen log near the worksite, passing a canteen back and forth. The sun was high and bright, but it gave no warmth. The cold was bone deep, the kind that made you forget summer ever existed. Sam took a long drink and handed the canteen back. "You have been doing this alone." 3 years. "That is a hell of a long time to carry this weight solo." Joe did not answer. She drank, wiped her mouth, and stood. Back to work. They labored until the light began to fade. By then they had reset 4 posts and restrung nearly 100 feet of fence. It was good work, solid. Joe looked at what they had accomplished and felt something unfamiliar stir in her chest. Not quite pride, not quite hope, but something close to both. As they walked back to the barn to put away tools, a sound carried across the frozen prairie. Hoofbeats, multiple horses coming fast. Joe's head snapped up. Her hand instinctively moved to the rifle she had left leaning against the fence. Sam saw the movement, and his own posture changed, became alert, ready. 5 riders crested the rise and galloped into the yard. They wore the rough clothing of ranch hands, but their manner was wrong. Too aggressive, too entitled. They did not ask permission before entering the property. They simply came as if they owned the place. The lead rider was a big man with a thick mustache and a face like a bulldog. He sat heavily on his horse, flanked by 4 others. One of them Joe recognized. The deputy who had come 6 months ago with eviction papers she could not pay. The others were strangers. The big man looked around the yard with barely concealed contempt. His eyes landed on Joe, and his lip curled. "Mrs. Ashford? Or is it still Mrs., seeing as how your husband is dead these 3 years?" Joe's jaw clenched. She said nothing. The man continued, his voice carrying across the cold air. "Name is Sheriff Garrett Wade. We have got business to discuss." Joe finally spoke, her voice flat. "What business?" Wade reached into his coat and pulled out a folded paper. He held it up but did not dismount to hand it over. "Official notice from the county. Voss Cattle Company filed a boundary survey. Says your fence is encroaching on their water access. You have got 30 days to contest or the line moves." Joe's hands curled into fists. "That land is mine. Water rights are filed." Wade shrugged. "Take it up with the county recorder. Not my problem. I just deliver papers." He tossed the notice into the dirt at Joe's feet. She did not move to pick it up. She stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Wade's face. Wade's gaze shifted to Sam, standing silent beside her. He looked Sam up and down, noting the worn coat, the bandage visible at his hairline, the way Sam held himself. Ready, but not threatening. Yet. "You the hired help?" Wade asked, a smirk touching his lips. "Something like that," Sam said coolly. Wade chuckled. It was a dry, nasty sound. "Good luck, friend. You are going to need it." One of the deputies, a man with yellow teeth and a mean cast to his face, leaned forward in his saddle. "Heard you took in a man, Widow Ashford. Guess the rumors were wrong. You are a woman after all. Just a lonely one." The other men laughed. The sound was ugly, designed to humiliate. Joe's face remained impassive, but Sam felt something shift beside him, a tension coiling tight, ready to snap. Sam stepped forward, his hand resting near the butt of the revolver on his hip. He did not draw. He just stood there, looking at the deputy with cold, dead eyes, the eyes of a man who had killed before and would do it again if necessary. The laughter died. The deputy shifted uneasily in his saddle. Wade's eyes narrowed. "You threatening an officer of the law, Drifter?" "No, sir," Sam said quietly. "Just standing here, same as you." The two men stared at each other. The moment stretched tight as a drawn bow. Finally, Wade spat into the dirt. "You got 30 days, Ashford. After that we come back with a surveyor and move the line ourselves." He wheeled his horse and the others followed. They galloped out of the yard, leaving nothing behind but hoof prints and the paper lying in the frozen mud. Joe stood motionless for a long moment. Then she bent and picked up the notice. Her hands were steady as she unfolded it, but Sam saw the way her jaw muscle jumped, the way her breathing had gone shallow. She read in silence. When she finished, she folded the paper again and tucked it into her coat pocket. "How bad?" Sam asked. "Bad enough." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw real fear in her eyes. Not fear of him. Fear of something larger, something that could not be fought with fists or rifles. "If they move the line, I lose access to the creek. Without water, the cattle die. Without cattle, I lose the land. Can you fight it legally?" Joe laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "With what money? With what lawyer? Voss owns half the county. The other half is too scared to cross him." Sam was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Let me ride to the county seat. Check the deed records. If the original survey is on file, they cannot just change it." Joe shook her head violently. "No, they will twist it. They always do." "Joe," Sam said, and his voice was gentle but firm, "you cannot fight this alone." "I have been fighting alone for 3 years. I can keep fighting." "And how is that working out?" The words hit harder than a slap. Joe's head snapped back as if he had struck her. For a moment Sam thought she might hit him or order him off her land, but instead something in her seemed to crumble, just a little, just enough. "What do you want from me?" she asked, and her voice had gone raw. "Why are you still here?" Sam met her eyes. "Because the last time I walked away from someone who needed help, she ended up dead. And I will be damned if I let that happen again." The silence that followed was heavy as stone. Joe stared at him, searching his face for the lie, for the angle, for the trap. But she found only honesty, painful, unflinching honesty. Finally she nodded once, a jerky movement. 3 days, she said again. "You can stay 3 days." But both of them knew the number was meaningless now. The storm that had brought Sam to her door was nothing compared to the one gathering on the horizon. And when it broke, 3 days would not be enough. 3 years might not be enough. They walked back to the house in silence as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of blood and fire. The night after the sheriff's visit, Joe did not sleep. She sat at the table in the darkness, the Winchester rifle laid across her lap, listening. The cabin creaked in the wind. The stove ticked as the metal cooled. Outside, the dogs shifted and whimpered in their sleep. Every sound made her muscles tense, her finger moving to the trigger guard. She was listening for footsteps, for the creak of a floorboard, for the sound of a door opening that should stay closed. Old habits died hard. For 3 years she had lived with Frank's ghost. Even now, with him cold in the ground, she could not shake the feeling that he might walk through that door, drunk, angry, looking for someone to hurt. Sam had moved to the barn as she had demanded. She had brought him blankets, an old buffalo robe, and a lantern. He had not argued. He had simply thanked her and closed the barn door, giving her the space she needed. But space did not bring peace. The cabin felt too empty and too full at the same time. Empty of threat, but full of memory. She sat in the dark and waited for dawn. When the first gray light began to filter through the window, Joe finally allowed herself to move. She stood, her joints stiff from sitting motionless for hours, and began the morning routine. Fire, coffee. the rituals that kept her grounded. By the time Sam knocked on the door, the sun was up and breakfast was cooking. She opened the door to find him standing on the porch, hat in hand, looking uncertain. "Morning," he said. Joe nodded and stepped aside to let him enter. He moved carefully, keeping distance between them, respecting the invisible boundary she had drawn. They ate in silence. Eggs, cornbread, coffee so strong it could strip paint. When the meal was finished, Sam spoke. "About yesterday, the sheriff and that paper. I have been thinking." Joe's jaw tightened. "Thinking what?" "I spent 5 years as a deputy marshal in Kansas before I came west. I know how land claims work. I know how to read survey maps and deed records. Let me ride to the county seat. I will check the files, see what Voss actually has. If your deed is solid, we have ammunition to fight back." "I told you, they will twist it." "Maybe, but right now we are fighting blind. We need to know what we are up against." Joe stared into her coffee cup. The liquid was black as tar, bitter as regret. She thought about the notice in her pocket, the 30 days counting down like a death sentence, the creek that was her lifeline about to be stolen by men who already had more than they needed. "If you go," she said slowly, "they will know. They will watch you, follow you. Make sure you do not find anything useful." "Let them watch. I am good at being underestimated." Joe looked up at him. In the morning light, his face was all hard angles and weathered lines, but his eyes were steady, clear, the eyes of a man who meant what he said. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you care what happens to me, to this place?" Sam was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, rough with something that might have been shame. 3 years ago I testified in a murder trial. Rancher named Dodd. He beat his wife to death. I saw the body, saw the bruises, the broken bones, the way her face was smashed in. I testified to everything I saw. But Dodd had money. He had a good lawyer. The jury acquitted him." He paused, his hands tightening around his coffee cup. 2 weeks later, his second wife went missing. They found her in a well on his property. She had been dead for days. If I had pushed harder, if I had done more than just testify and walk away, maybe she would still be alive. Maybe I could have stopped him before he killed again. Joe sat very still. She understood now. Understood why he had stayed. Why he looked at her the way he did, like she was something that needed protecting. "I am not her," Joe said quietly. "I know that. I do not need saving. I know that too." Sam met her eyes. "But maybe I need to stop running, and maybe you need someone to stand with you instead of alone. Not because you are weak, but because this fight is bigger than one person." Joe wanted to refuse, wanted to send him away before the walls cracked any further. But the truth was, she was tired, bone tired, tired of fighting alone, tired of being strong every minute of every day with no rest, no help, no hope that it would ever get better. 3 days, she said again. But this time the words felt like a surrender rather than a command. Sam nodded. "I will leave at first light tomorrow. Check the records, talk to the county recorder, see what I can find. Should be back in 2 days if the weather holds. And if it does not hold, then I will be back in 3. They finished breakfast in silence. Then they went out to continue the work. There were still posts to set wire, to string a barn roof, to shore up before it collapsed entirely. As they worked, a small figure appeared on the road leading to the homestead. A girl, thin as a rail, wearing a coat too big for her frame and a bonnet that had seen better days. She walked with a peculiar gait, one foot dragging slightly as if she had injured it, and it had never healed right. Joe straightened, shading her eyes against the sun. "Abby." The girl raised a hand in greeting and quickened her pace. When she reached the yard, she was breathing hard, her cheeks flushed with cold and exertion. "Morning, Mrs. Joe," she said. Her voice was soft, almost musical. She had the kind of face that would be pretty when she grew into it. Big eyes, delicate features. But there was an old quality to her expression, as if she had seen too much too young. "Abby Trent," Joe said, and there was warmth in her voice that had not been there before. "What brings you out here? Your aunt know you left?" Abby's face fell. Aunt Meredith died last week. Fever. I have been staying at the church, but Reverend says I cannot stay much longer, says it is not proper him being unmarried and me being 14. Joe's expression darkened. Where are you supposed to go? Nowhere, I guess. I came to ask if maybe you need help. I can work. I am good with chickens and I know how to mend. I do not eat much. Joe looked at the girl. Abby had been coming around the homestead for the better part of a year doing odd jobs in exchange for food. She was an orphan, her parents dead of cholera, raised by an aunt who had been kind but sickly. Now the aunt was gone too, and Abby was alone in the world. You can stay, Joe said. Barn loft has space. I cannot pay you, but you will have food and shelter. Abby's face lit up like the sun breaking through clouds. Thank you, Mrs. Joe. Thank you. I will work hard. I promise. I know you will. Joe glanced at Sam, who had been standing quietly during the exchange. This is Sam Calloway. He is helping with repairs. Sam, this is Abby Trent. Sam touched the brim of his hat. Pleased to meet you, Miss Abby. Abby looked at Sam with open curiosity. Her gaze went to the bandage on his head, then to his hands scarred and calloused from work. Then she looked at his eyes. After a moment she smiled. It was a shy smile, tentative but genuine. You have got kind eyes, she said. Not like Mr. Frank. The words fell into the space between them like stones into a well. Joe went rigid. Sam's expression did not change, but something shifted in his posture, a sharpening of attention. Abby, Joe said, her voice tight. Go inside. There is cornbread left from breakfast. Help yourself. Abby nodded and hurried toward the cabin, her dragging foot leaving a distinctive track in the snow. When the door closed behind her, Sam turned to Joe. Mr. Frank, he said quietly, your husband. Joe did not answer. She picked up the post-hole digger and attacked the frozen ground with renewed violence. Each strike rang out like a gunshot. Sam watched her for a moment, then picked up his own tools and went back to work. But the words hung in the air between them unspoken, but understood. Not like Mr. Frank. They worked through the morning, the three of them falling into a rhythm. Abby took over the lighter tasks, hauling tools, holding wire, fetching water. She chattered as she worked, filling the silence with stories about the chickens at her aunt's house, about a dog she had once owned, about a song she had learned from a traveling minstrel. Joe did not tell her to be quiet. The sound of another voice, young and hopeful, was like medicine for a wound Joe had not realized was still bleeding. By midday they had finished the south fence line. The posts stood straight and strong, the wire strung tight. It was good work. Work that would hold against weather and wandering cattle. Work that said someone cared about this place. As they walked back toward the house for the noon meal, Sam broke the comfortable silence. That grave by the garden, he said. That is Frank. Joe stiffened, but did not stop walking. Yes. How did he die? Joe was quiet for so long that Sam thought she would not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was flat, emotionless. Accident in the barn, 3 years ago. His head struck the anvil. The doctor said he died quick. Sam heard what she did not say, heard the careful choice of words. The way she said it struck the anvil rather than he fell and struck. The passive construction that removed agency. I am sorry for your loss, he said, because it was what you said, even when you suspected the loss was not mourned. Joe laughed. It was a short, sharp sound with no humor in it. Are you? Before Sam could respond, a sound cut through the cold air. Hoofbeats again, but this time only one horse, coming fast. They all turned toward the road. A rider crested the rise, spurring his mount hard. As he drew closer, Joe recognized him. Miller, the foreman for the Voss Cattle Company, a big man with red hair and a face full of scars from a lifetime of brawling. He reined in his horse hard, making the animal rear and dance. Show off. Intimidation. Mrs. Ashford, he called, not bothering to dismount. Got a message from Mr. Voss. I am not interested in messages from Voss. Miller grinned. It was not a pleasant expression. You will be interested in this one. Mr. Voss is a generous man. He is offering $500 for your land, cash money, enough for you to go somewhere else, California maybe, somewhere they do not know what you are." The insult was deliberate. Joe's hands curled into fists, but her voice remained steady. "Tell Voss my land is not for sale." Miller's grin widened. "Mr. Voss thought you might say that. So he asked me to remind you that 30 days is not a long time, and winter is hard. Accidents happen, stock gets scattered, buildings catch fire. A woman alone out here, well, that is a dangerous thing." Sam stepped forward. His movement was casual, unhurried, but it put him between Miller and Joe. His hand rested near his gun. "She is not alone," Sam said quietly. Miller's eyes flicked to Sam, assessing. He saw the gun, saw the way Sam carried himself, saw something in Sam's eyes that made him reconsider whatever he had been about to say. "Hired yourself a guard dog, did you?" Miller said to Joe, but his tone had lost some of its swagger. "That is smart. But one dog against a pack of wolves, well, we all know how that ends." He wheeled his horse and galloped away, leaving them standing in the yard. Joe did not move for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice shook with suppressed rage. "He threatened me. On my own land. In front of witnesses." "Yes, he did," Sam said. "And there is nothing I can do about it. If I go to the law, they will say it was a misunderstanding. If I defend myself, they will say I am violent, that I am proving them right." Sam turned to face her. "Then we make sure it does not come to that. I ride to the county seat tomorrow. I find proof that your deed is legal and your water rights are solid. We take that proof to a judge, file an injunction against Voss moving the boundary line. We fight this in court where words matter more than guns." Joe shook her head. "You do not understand. Voss owns the judges. He owns the lawyers. He owns everything that matters." "Maybe, but I have to try. Because if we do not fight, you lose anyway. At least this way you lose fighting." Abby, who had been standing silent during the exchange, spoke up. Her voice was small but clear. "My pa always said the worst sin was not fighting and losing. It was giving up without a fight. He said that is how you lose your soul." Joe looked at the girl. Abby stared back, her young face set with a determination that made her seem much older than 14. "Your pa was a wise man," Joe said softly. "He was also a drunk who froze to death in a ditch," Abby said matter-of-factly. "But he was right about that one thing." Despite everything, Sam smiled. There was something about the girl's blunt honesty that was refreshing. No pretense, no false comfort, just truth hard and sharp as a knife. They went inside for the midday meal. Abby set the table while Joe cooked. Sam tended the fire, adding wood, adjusting the damper. They moved around each other with a strange domesticity, as if they had been doing this for years rather than days. As they ate, Abby asked questions. Where was Sam from? What had brought him to Wyoming? Did he have family? Sam answered the easy questions and deflected the hard ones. Joe listened in silence, learning pieces of the man who had appeared out of a storm. Kansas, 5 years as a deputy marshal. Wife and daughter dead 3 years. No family left to speak of. A wanderer by necessity rather than choice. When Abby asked why he had left Kansas, Sam's face went carefully blank. Made some mistakes. Needed a fresh start. Abby nodded as if that made perfect sense. Everybody makes mistakes. Mrs. Joe says the only real mistake is not learning from them. Sam glanced at Joe. She was staring at her plate, but he saw the faint color rise in her cheeks. She had said that to Abby. Words meant to teach a young girl, but maybe also words she was trying to believe herself. After the meal, Sam announced he was going to check on his horse. The bay's leg had been resting for 2 days, and it was time to see if the animal could bear weight. Joe and Abby cleaned up while he was gone. As they worked, Abby spoke in a low voice. "He is nice. Mr. Sam. He is leaving in a few days. But he might come back. People do not come back, Abby. Not here." Abby was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You came back. After you left town that time, everyone said you would never come back. But you did." Joe stopped, her hands still in the wash water. She had forgotten. 6 months after Frank died, she had tried to leave, had packed a bag, saddled a horse, and ridden toward the train station in Bitter Creek. She had made it as far as the town limits before she turned around, not because she wanted to stay, but because she had nowhere else to go. No family, no friends, no money for a train ticket east. The homestead was all she had, the only thing in the world that belonged to her, so she had come back. And the town had laughed, whispered that she could not survive anywhere else, that she was trapped by her own strangeness. That was different, Joe said. How? Joe did not have an answer. Sam returned with the news that his horse was sound. The leg had healed well enough to ride. He could leave in the morning as planned. That evening, as the sun set and the temperature plummeted, they sat around the table. Abby had found an old deck of cards in a trunk and insisted they play. The game was simple, the stakes non-existent, but it felt good to do something normal, something that was not work or worry or fear. As they played, Sam told a story about a time in Kansas when he had arrested a man for stealing a chicken, only to discover the man was the mayor's brother-in-law. Abby laughed delighted. Even Joe smiled a small crack in her armor. But as the night deepened, the good mood faded. Tomorrow, Sam would ride to the county seat, and Joe would be left to wonder if he would come back, if he would find anything useful, if any of this struggling would matter in the end. When the card game finished, Abby yawned hugely. Joe sent her to the loft with extra blankets. The girl climbed the ladder slowly, her bad foot making the ascent awkward. When she reached the top, she called down, "Good night, Mrs. Joe. Good night, Mr. Sam." "Good night, Abby," they answered in unison. Sam stood to leave, reaching for his coat, but Joe stopped him with a hand on his arm. She pulled back immediately as if the touch had burned, but the damage was done. She had initiated contact, broken her own rule. "Be careful," she said. "Voss has people everywhere. If they think you are a threat, they will not wait for the law. They will handle you themselves." "I will be careful. Promise me." Sam looked at her. In the low light of the lantern, her face was all shadows and sharp angles, but her eyes were wide, frightened, not for herself, but for him. "I promise," he said. Joe nodded once, then turned away. Sam let himself out into the cold night. As he walked to the barn, he thought about the way Joe had touched his arm, the brief contact, the way she had pulled back as if shocked by her own boldness. 3 years. 3 years since she had allowed herself to touch another human being willingly. 3 years since she had let anyone close enough to matter. Sam settled into his makeshift bed in the barn loft, surrounded by the warm smell of hay and horses. He stared up at the dark rafters and thought about the woman in the cabin, strong enough to split logs and drag a grown man through snow, tough enough to survive 3 years alone on a failing homestead, but so damaged by whatever had happened in her marriage that a simple touch sent her reeling. He thought about Frank Ashford, about the grave with no name, about the way Abby had said, "Not like Mr. Frank," with such certainty, and he thought about the scars he had seen on Joe's shoulder when he had first woken in the cabin. Just a glimpse before she pulled her dress back into place. But enough. Enough to know that Frank Ashford had done more than hit his wife. He had marked her, branded her, made sure she would never forget him. Sam's hands clenched into fists. He had failed one woman, let her die because he had not fought hard enough. He would not fail another. Morning came cold and clear. Sam rose before dawn and saddled his horse. The bay was sound moving without hesitation. Good. The ride to the county seat was 60 miles through rough country. He would need a strong mount. Joe appeared as he was tightening the cinch. She carried a canvas bag which she handed to him without a word. Inside he found food. Cornbread wrapped in cloth, dried beef, a hard-boiled egg, enough for 2 days on the road. "Thank you," he said. "Just be careful." Sam swung into the saddle. From horseback he looked down at Joe. She stood with her arms wrapped around herself, her breath clouding in the frigid air. She looked small in a way she never did up close. Vulnerable. "I will be back," he said. 2 days, 3 at most. People say a lot of things. I keep my word." Their eyes met, held. Something passed between them, unspoken but understood. Then Sam touched the brim of his hat and rode out. He did not look back. If he had, he would have seen Joe standing in the yard long after he disappeared over the rise, standing and watching the empty road as if she could will him to return safely through sheer force of wanting. The ride to the county seat took a day and a half. Sam pushed hard, stopping only to rest the horse and snatch a few hours of sleep wrapped in his bedroll beneath the stars. The country he traveled through was harsh and unforgiving, empty miles of scrubland broken by rocky outcrops and dry washes, the kind of land that broke the weak and tested the strong. He reached the town of Clearwater just after noon on the second day. It was a sprawling, ugly place built on the ambitions of silver miners and cattle barons. The main street was a chaos of freight wagons, horses, and people. The air smelled of manure, wood smoke, and money. Sam left his horse at a livery on the outskirts and walked to the courthouse. It was a 2-story brick building that dominated the town square, imposing and permanent in a place where most structures were wood and temporary. Inside, the Hall of Records smelled of dust and ink and slowly decaying paper. The clerk was asleep at his desk, his head pillowed on his arms, snoring softly. Sam cleared his throat. The clerk jerked awake, blinking. "Help you," he mumbled. "I need to see the land claim records for the Bitter Creek district, specifically the Ashford homestead." The clerk yawned and waved vaguely toward the shelves that lined the walls. "Township maps are over there. Claims are filed by year. Good luck finding anything. Place is a mess." Sam spent the next 4 hours turning pages. The records were indeed a mess, filed haphazardly, some pages water-damaged, others torn or missing entirely. But he was patient. He had learned patience in his years as a lawman, learned that sometimes the truth was buried under layers of bureaucracy and laziness, and you had to dig. He found Joe's deed. It was there, recorded in 1868. Frank Ashford claimant. 160 acres under the Homestead Act. Water rights to Bitter Creek clearly marked and witnessed by the territorial surveyor. But on the very next page, he found something else. A second claim filed 3 weeks after Frank's death. A boundary correction submitted by a man named J. Miller on behalf of the Voss Cattle Company. The correction claimed that the original survey had been in error, that the creek access actually belonged to the adjacent parcel land now owned by Clayton Voss. Sam stared at the signature on the witness line. J. Miller, the same foreman who had ridden onto Joe's land yesterday with threats and insults. He checked the date again. Then he pulled out another ledger, this one containing court records and jail rosters. It took him 20 minutes to find what he was looking for. In July of 1868, the same month as the boundary correction, J. Miller had been in jail, not in Wyoming but in Texas, arrested for brawling and held for 30 days. Miller could not have witnessed the boundary survey in Wyoming if he was in a Texas jail cell 2 states away. The claim was a forgery, a fraud, and Sam now had proof. He carefully copied down the relevant information, noting dates, file numbers, and the name of the county recorder who had accepted the fraudulent claim without question. Then he closed the ledgers and left the courthouse. As he stepped into the late afternoon sunlight, 3 men detached themselves from the shadows across the street. They walked toward him with the deliberate swagger of hired muscle. Sam recognized the middle one. He had been with Sheriff Wade when the lawman delivered the eviction notice to Joe. The man smiled. It was not a friendly expression. "Afternoon, friend. Heard you were asking questions about the Voss land claims." Sam stopped walking. His hand moved casually to rest near his gun. "Public records. Anyone can look." Sure, but Mr. Voss, he does not appreciate people sticking their noses where they do not belong. He sent us to deliver a message." "I am listening." The man's smile widened. "Message is, you should leave town, right now. Forget whatever you think you found. Ride back to that freak woman and tell her to take the money Mr. Voss offered, because if you do not, well, accidents happen. You might fall off your horse, crack your skull. Nobody would find you for weeks out on the prairie." Sam looked at each man in turn. He measured them, saw that they were armed, that they outnumbered him, that they had the advantage of surprise and position. He also saw that they were not killers. Not yet. They were bullies used to backing down opponents with threats and numbers. But there was a difference between talking about violence and doing it. Sam smiled. It was a cold smile, empty of humor. "Tell Voss I found exactly what I came for. Tell him I will be filing an injunction with the territorial court to block his fraudulent claim. And tell him that if anything happens to Mrs. Ashford or her property, I will come for him personally. Not as a lawman, as a private citizen. Do you understand?" The three men exchanged glances. Sam saw doubt flicker across their faces. "You are making a mistake, friend. Would not be my first." Sam walked past them, keeping his hand near his gun. They did not follow. He collected his horse from the livery and rode out of town as the sun touched the western horizon. He did not make it far before he realized he was being followed. Two riders keeping their distance but matching his pace. They stayed just out of rifle range silhouettes against the darkening sky. Sam considered his options. He could try to lose them in the broken country ahead, but his horse was already tired from the hard ride to town. He could confront them, but 2 against 1 in open country was poor odds. Or he could keep riding, hope they were just following to make sure he left and deal with them if they made a move. He chose to keep riding. As full dark fell, Sam made camp in a dry wash lined with cottonwood trees. He built no fire, just rolled himself in his blanket and waited. The two riders passed by an hour later, not seeing him in the shadows. Sam waited another hour, then quietly saddled his horse and rode on through the dark. He navigated by the stars, keeping the North Star over his left shoulder, heading southwest toward Bitter Creek. The temperature dropped brutally. His breath froze in the air. The horse's hooves crunched on ground that rang like iron. Sometime after midnight, Sam heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A woman screaming. He reined in hard, listening. There, ahead and to the right. A scream cut short, then the sound of breaking wood. Fire crackled. Sam spurred his horse forward, caution abandoned. He crested a rise and saw it. A small homestead maybe 5 miles from Joe's place. The barn was engulfed in flames, the fire so hot it lit the night like day. In the yard, 2 men on horseback were smashing windows with rifle butts while a third torched the house. A woman stood in the doorway trying to beat back the flames with a blanket. Behind her, Sam could hear children crying. He did not think. He drew his pistol and fired 3 shots into the air. The crack of gunfire echoed across the empty land. The 3 men wheeled their horses, searching for the source of the shots. Sam charged down the slope, firing again. This time he aimed lower. His bullet kicked up dirt at the nearest horse's feet. The animal reared, throwing its rider. The other 2 men returned fire, but they were shooting blind, unable to see Sam clearly in the darkness beyond the fire's light. Sam fired once more, and one of them yelped, clutching his arm. Not a killing shot, but enough. "Next one goes in your chest," Sam roared. "Get out of here!" The 3 men scrambled to remount. They galloped away into the night, leaving Sam alone with the woman and the burning buildings. Sam dismounted and ran to help. The barn was beyond saving, but the house could still be salvaged. He grabbed the blanket from the woman's hands and beat at the flames, climbing the doorframe. The woman ran for water. Together they fought the fire for 20 minutes before finally bringing it under control. When it was done, they collapsed in the yard, covered in soot and ash, breathing hard. The barn was gone, reduced to a skeleton of blackened beams. But the house stood, damaged but standing. The woman looked at Sam. She was young, maybe 25, with a hard, worn face and eyes that had seen too much. "Who are you?" she asked. "Sam Calloway. I was riding past." "Lucky you were." She gestured to the ruins of the barn. "They said if we do not sell to Voss, this is what happens. Said next time they will burn the house with us inside." Sam felt rage coil in his gut. "Did you recognize them?" "No. But I know who sent them." "Will you testify to that in court?" The woman laughed bitterly. "And say what? That I think Voss sent men to burn me out. Without proof they will call me a liar. With proof they will call me dead." Sam understood. He helped the woman move her children to a neighbor's house, then rode on. But the image of those flames stayed with him. This was not about land or water. This was about power, about men like Voss crushing anyone who stood in their way, and Joe was standing directly in his path. Sam reached Joe's homestead just as dawn broke on the third day. He was exhausted, covered in soot and dried sweat, his eyes red from lack of sleep. But he had what he came for: proof, ammunition, a chance. Joe was in the yard when he rode in. She turned at the sound of hoofbeats, and for just a second he saw naked relief cross her face before the walls went back up. "You came back," she said. "Told you I would." She looked at him, taking in his appearance. "You look like hell." "Feel like it too, but I found what we needed." They walked to the house. Abby was inside making breakfast. She brightened when she saw Sam. "Mr. Sam, you are back." "We were worried." Sam managed a tired smile. "Just tired, Miss Abby. Nothing a good meal and some sleep will not fix." Joe poured coffee while Sam washed his face and hands in the basin. Then he sat at the table and told them everything: the fraudulent boundary claim, the forged signature, the proof that Miller had been in Texas when he supposedly witnessed the survey in Wyoming. Joe listened in silence. When he finished, she sat back in her chair. "So we can fight it, in court." "Yes. We file an injunction, present the evidence, and the judge will have no choice but to rule in your favor. The boundary stays where it is, and your water rights are protected." "And Voss?" Sam's expression darkened. "He will not be happy. I ran into some of his men in Clearwater. They made threats. I made some back." "What kind of threats?" Sam told her about the 3 men who had tried to warn him off, about the 2 who had followed him, about the burning homestead he had stumbled upon. Joe's face went pale. "They are escalating." "Yes." "Then going to court will only make it worse. If we embarrass Voss publicly, he will retaliate, not with lawyers, with fire, with bullets." Sam met her eyes. "Maybe, but if we do not fight, you lose anyway. At least this way you lose fighting, and maybe, just maybe, we win." The words hung in the air. Abby looked between them, sensing the weight of the decision. Finally, Joe spoke. "We fight." Sam nodded. "Then we need a lawyer, someone Voss does not own." "There is no such person in this county." "Then we go to the next county, or the territorial capital if we have to. Somewhere Voss's reach does not extend." Joe was about to respond when the sound of hoofbeats interrupted. Again, this time many horses, a lot of them. They went to the window and looked out. Sam cursed softly. Sheriff Wade was back. But this time he had brought a dozen men, not deputies, rough-looking men with rifles across their saddles. Voss's hired guns wearing the thin veneer of legal authority. Joe grabbed her rifle from the wall. Sam put a hand on her arm. "Wait, let us hear what they want." They stepped out onto the porch. Wade sat his horse in the center of the group, his face grim. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Calloway, step away from the house." "This is my land, Sheriff," Joe said. "I will stand where I please." Wade's jaw tightened. "Fine. Then hear this. You are being placed under arrest for the murder of Frank Ashford. Investigation has been reopened based on new evidence. You will come with me to Clearwater to stand trial." The world seemed to stop. Joe's face went white. The rifle trembled in her hands. Sam stepped forward. "What evidence?" "Witness testimony. Cannot discuss details, but it is enough for Judge Morrison to issue a warrant. Mrs. Ashford, put down the rifle and come peacefully. Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Sam's mind raced. This was Voss's play. He could not take the land legally, so he was taking Joe. Put her on trial for murder, get her convicted and hanged, and the land would revert to the county, where Voss could buy it for taxes. "She is not going anywhere," Sam said. Wade's hand moved to his gun. "You are interfering with the law, Calloway. That is a crime." "This is not law. This is a lynching with paperwork." The 12 men behind Wade shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward weapons. The tension stretched so tight it felt like the air itself might shatter. Then from inside the house a small voice spoke. "Mrs. Joe did not kill Mr. Frank. He was mean and he hurt her, and when he died she cried. I saw. I was there." Abby appeared in the doorway, her young face set with determination. Wade looked at the girl, his expression softening slightly. "You cannot know that child. You were not there when Frank died. But I saw the bruises before. I saw her crying after. I saw everything, and I will testify to it if you try to hurt her." Wade sighed. He looked genuinely uncomfortable now, caught between his duty and his conscience. But then his face hardened. Orders were orders. "Step aside, child. Mrs. Ashford, this is your last chance. Come peacefully, or we will take you by force." Joe lowered the rifle slowly. She looked at Sam, and he saw defeat in her eyes. "It is all right," she said quietly. "I will go. Do not make them hurt you." "Joe," Sam said. But she shook her head. "Take care of Abby. Please." She started to step off the porch. Sam grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Their eyes met. And in that moment, something passed between them. Something that had been building since the night she dragged him out of the snow. "I am not letting them take you," Sam said. "You do not have a choice." "Yes, I do. We both do." And then, before his courage could fail him, before the moment could pass, Sam Calloway did something he had not done in 3 years. He took a chance. He kissed her. It was not gentle. It was fierce, desperate, a claiming and a promise all at once. Joe froze for a heartbeat, shock and fear, and something else warring on her face. Then she kissed him back. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Sam turned to face Wade. "She is not going with you. Not now. Not ever. If you want her, you go through me." Wade stared at him. Then slowly the sheriff shook his head. "You are a damn fool, Calloway." Would not be the first time someone said that. For a long moment no one moved. Then Wade turned his horse. "I will be back. With a judge's order and more men. Whatever you think you are doing here, it ends badly. Mark my words." He rode out his men following. But as they crested the rise, Wade looked back one last time. His expression was unreadable. When they were gone, Sam and Joe stood on the porch in silence. Abby had disappeared back inside, giving them privacy. "You should not have done that," Joe said finally. "Which part? Any of it?" Sam turned to look at her. "I have spent 3 years running from everything, from responsibility, from connection, from caring what happens to anyone but myself. I am tired of running, Joe, and I will be damned if I watch them take you without a fight." Joe's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away angrily. "They will come back, and next time they will not ask nicely." "Then we had better be ready." The first thing Sam did after Wade rode away was bolt every door and window in the house. The second thing was to check his ammunition. 6 rounds in the Colt, a box of cartridges in his saddlebag. The Winchester had maybe 20 shots if Joe had kept it loaded properly. Not enough. Not nearly enough if Voss sent his full crew. Joe stood in the center of the cabin, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. The kiss still burned on her lips. The fear still churned in her gut. For 3 years she had built walls high enough to keep the world out. Sam had just torn them down with a single moment of reckless courage, and she did not know whether to thank him or curse him. "We need to leave," she said finally. "Take Abby, ride north to Montana. We can start over where Voss's reach does not extend." Sam looked at her. "Is that what you want? To run?" "I want to survive." "Surviving is not the same as living." Joe's jaw tightened. "You do not understand. Frank is dead, but they still use him to control me. They will put me on trial for his murder. They will make me stand in front of the whole town and defend myself while they pick apart every moment of my marriage. They will make me a spectacle, and then they will hang me. Not if we fight back." "With what?" "We have no money for lawyers, no friends in power, nothing but hope and stubbornness." Sam crossed the room to stand in front of her, not touching, respecting the space she needed, but close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. "I have been where you are. 3 years ago I stood in a courtroom and watched a guilty man walk free because I did not fight hard enough. I let him walk, and 2 weeks later another woman died. I have been carrying that weight ever since." He paused, his voice dropping to something raw and honest. I am not asking you to fight for me. I am asking you to fight for yourself, because you deserve better than running, better than hiding, better than letting men like Voss steal what is rightfully yours." Joe looked at him. At the scars on his face, the exhaustion in his eyes, the stubborn set of his jaw. He had ridden 60 miles, faced down hired guns, and come back when he could have kept riding. He had stayed when anyone with sense would have left, and he had kissed her, not with pity or obligation, but with something that felt dangerously like want. "I am scared," she whispered. "I know. So am I." "Then why are you still here?" Sam smiled. It was a sad smile tinged with something that might have been hope. "Because for the first time in 3 years, I have a reason to stop running." Before Joe could respond, Abby appeared in the doorway. Her young face was pale, her eyes too wide. "They are coming back. I saw dust on the north road." Sam moved to the window. Sure enough, a dust cloud rose in the distance. Multiple riders, coming fast. "Joe, get Abby into the root cellar. There is a cellar right—" "Yes, behind the house." "Good. Take food and water. Stay there until I come for you." Joe grabbed her rifle. "I am not hiding while you fight alone." "You are not hiding. You are protecting Abby. That girl needs you alive more than she needs you brave." The words hit like a physical blow. Joe looked at Abby, saw the fear in the child's eyes, and felt something shift inside her. For 3 years she had fought only for herself, for survival, for the right to be left alone. But now there was someone else to protect, someone who needed her. "Go," Sam said again. "I will hold them off." Joe grabbed Abby's hand and pulled her toward the back door. As they ran, Sam called after them, "Joe, when this is over, we are going to talk about that kiss." Despite everything, Joe felt her face flush. Then she and Abby were outside running for the root cellar. They pulled open the heavy wooden door and descended into the cool darkness. Joe pulled the door shut over their heads and dropped the bar into place from the inside. They sat in the darkness, listening to the sound of their own breathing and the muffled thunder of hoofbeats drawing closer. Sam watched through the window as 6 riders approached. Not Wade this time. These were harder men, meaner, led by Miller, the red-haired foreman with the scarred face. They reined in 30 yards from the house. Miller called out, his voice carrying clearly in the cold air. "Calloway, we know you are in there. Send out the woman, and we will let you ride away." Sam checked the Winchester. 20 rounds. He positioned himself at the window rifle ready. "Mrs. Ashford is under my protection. You want her, you come through me." Miller laughed. "1 man against 6. Those are bad odds, friend. I have been in worse. Have it your way." Miller raised his hand. The 6 men spread out surrounding the house. They did not charge. They were professionals. They took cover behind the barn, the water trough, the corral fence, positions that gave them clear lines of fire on the doors and windows. Then one of them threw something, a torch. It arced through the air and landed on the roof of the chicken coop. The dry wood caught immediately, flames spreading fast. Sam fired. His bullet splintered the post next to Miller's head. The foreman ducked back, cursing. "That is just the start, Calloway. We will burn everything, the barn, the house, every damn building on this place. Send out the woman or watch it all turn to ash." Sam did not answer. He moved to the back window, watching for anyone trying to flank the house. Sure enough, 2 men were creeping around the south side, using the smoke from the burning coop as cover. He fired twice. Both men dove for cover. He could not tell if he hit anyone, but he made them cautious. This was not going to work. He was 1 man trying to defend a structure with 4 sides and multiple entry points. Eventually, they would get in, or they would burn him out. Either way, he was going to lose. Unless. Sam ran to the stove and grabbed a pot of stew that had been simmering for lunch. Still hot. He carried it to the front window and heaved it out. The pot sailed through the air and exploded against the barn wall, spraying boiling liquid. One of the men hiding there screamed. It was not much, but it bought him seconds. He used those seconds to run to the back door, throw it open, and sprint for the root cellar. Bullets kicked up dirt at his heels. He dove behind the wood pile as return fire chewed splinters from the logs. He fired blind just enough to keep their heads down, then scrambled the last few yards to the cellar door. He wrenched it open and dropped inside, pulling the door shut behind him. In the sudden darkness, he heard Abby whimper. Then Joe's hands were on him, checking for injuries. "Are you hit?" "No, but the house is lost. They will burn it." "Let them. We are alive. That is what matters." Sam felt something warm bloom in his chest at those words. Not the house, not the land. We are alive. They huddled in the darkness, listening to the sounds of destruction above, the crackle of flames, the crash of timbers, men shouting. After a time, the sounds faded. The riders left their job done. When silence finally returned, Sam cracked the cellar door open. Smoke stung his eyes. The chicken coop was gone, reduced to smoking rubble. The barn was on fire, the flames eating through the north wall. But the house still stood, damaged but standing. They emerged from the cellar into a world painted in shades of gray and black. Ash fell like snow. The air tasted of destruction. Abby started to cry. Not loud, not hysterical, just quiet tears running down her soot-stained cheeks. Joe pulled the girl close, holding her tight. Sam walked through the ruins, assessing the damage. The barn could be saved if they acted fast. He grabbed a bucket and ran for the well. Joe joined him, and together they fought the fire. Bucket after bucket of icy water thrown onto burning wood. It took an hour, but they got it under control. When it was done, they collapsed in the yard, exhausted and filthy. Abby sat between them, her head on Joe's shoulder. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, Sam broke the silence. "This does not change anything. We still fight." Joe looked at the damaged barn, the destroyed coop, the scorched earth. "They destroyed half of what I have. How is that not changing things?" "Because they want you to give up. That is the whole point. Terror and destruction until you break. But you are still here, still breathing, still fighting." Joe shook her head. "I am tired of fighting." "I know, but we are not done yet." That night they slept in shifts. Sam took the first watch, sitting on the porch with the rifle across his knees. The night was cold and clear, stars scattered across the black sky like broken glass. He watched the road, the shadows, the places where danger might hide. At midnight, Joe came out to relieve him. She carried a cup of coffee, which she handed to him without a word. He took it gratefully, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. "You should sleep," she said. "So should you." "I do not sleep much anymore. Have not for years." Sam nodded. He understood that. The nightmares, the hypervigilance, the way your body forgot how to relax when danger had been a constant companion. They sat in silence for a time. Then Joe spoke. "That kiss. Earlier." Sam went very still. "What about it? Why did you do that?" He could have lied, could have said it was strategy, a way to throw Wade off balance. But he was tired of lying, tired of hiding from the truth. "Because I wanted to. Because for the first time in 3 years, I felt something other than guilt and grief. Because you matter to me, Joe, more than you should after such a short time." Joe was quiet for so long he thought she would not respond. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "No one has kissed me like that since before Frank. And even then, it was never like that. Never like something wanted rather than something owed." She turned to look at him, and in the moonlight her face was both hard and vulnerable. "I do not know how to do this, how to want someone without being afraid, how to let someone close without expecting pain." Sam reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she did not, he took her hand. Her palm was rough with calluses, her fingers strong. He held it gently as if it were something precious. "We figure it out together, one day at a time. No promises except this. I will not hurt you, not the way he did." Joe's eyes filled with tears. She blinked them away angrily, but one escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "He said that too, in the beginning." "I know, and I cannot prove I am different except by being different, every day, For as long as you will let me." They sat holding hands on the porch until dawn broke. Neither of them slept, but for the first time in years, Joe did not feel quite so alone. Morning brought unexpected visitors. A wagon rolled into the yard just after sunrise. At the reins sat Mrs. Ida Brennan, the doctor's wife from town. Beside her sat two other women Joe recognized from Bitter Creek, Mrs. Sarah Chen, who ran the laundry, and Miss Alice Porter, the school teacher. Sam and Joe stood on the porch wary, but Mrs. Brennan climbed down from the wagon with a smile that was warm and genuine. "Mrs. Ashford, Mr. Calloway, we heard what happened yesterday. Thought you might need help." Joe stared at her. "Why would you help me? Your husband is on Voss's payroll." Mrs. Brennan's smile faded. "My husband is a coward. I am not. I saw what Frank did to you for 3 years. I saw the bruises you tried to hide, the way you flinched when anyone moved too fast. I did nothing then because I was scared, but I am not scared anymore." She gestured to the other women. "We are not scared anymore. Voss thinks he can terrorize women into submission. Time we showed him different." The 3 women unloaded supplies from the wagon: food, blankets, nails and lumber, medical supplies, things that cost money Joe did not have. "I cannot pay you," Joe said. "Did not ask you to. This is not charity. This is sisterhood. We take care of our own." Joe felt something break loose in her chest, something hard and painful that had been lodged there for years. She nodded, not trusting herself to speak. The women set to work. Mrs. Chen and Miss Porter helped Abby repair the chicken coop, while Mrs. Brennan tended to Sam's reopened head wound and checked Joe for injuries. As she worked, she spoke quietly. "I will testify. About the bruises. About the times you came to my husband for medicine because Frank had hurt you again. About the way the whole town knew what was happening and did nothing." Joe looked at her. "They will call you a liar. They will say you are a troublemaker. Let them. I am an old woman with a mean streak and nothing left to lose. What can they do to me?" Sam, overhearing, spoke up. "They can do a lot, ma'am. Voss does not play fair." Mrs. Brennan snorted. "Neither do I. I have been doctoring people in this territory for 30 years. I know secrets that would make your hair curl. Voss wants to come after me. He better be ready for a fight." The women worked through the morning. By noon, the chicken coop had been rebuilt, the barn patched, and the yard cleared of debris. It was not perfect, but it was functional. Survival was about function, not beauty. As they prepared to leave, Mrs. Brennan took Joe aside. "There is something you should know. Judge Morrison, the one who issued the warrant for your arrest. His wife died in childbirth 5 years ago. My husband was the attending physician. He made a mistake during the delivery, used instruments wrong, caused internal bleeding. The judge knows this. My husband has been paying him money ever since to keep quiet." Joe's eyes widened. "You are saying the judge is corrupt?" "I am saying the judge is compromised. And if we can prove it, we can get that warrant thrown out, maybe even get Morrison removed from the bench." Sam stepped forward, his mind racing. "Do you have proof documents?" "My husband keeps records, ledgers showing the payments. I can get them." "That is dangerous," Sam said. Mrs. Brennan smiled. It was a fierce smile full of teeth. "So is breathing in this territory. Might as well make it count." She climbed back onto the wagon. The 3 women waved as they rode away, leaving Sam and Joe standing in the yard. "We have allies," Joe said, sounding stunned. "We do." "I did not think anyone cared." "People care. They are just scared. Mrs. Brennan gave them permission to be brave." Joe looked at him. "She gave them more than that. She gave them hope." That afternoon, Sam rode to town. It was a risk, but a necessary one. If they were going to fight Voss in court, they needed a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Someone with the skill and courage to go up against a powerful man in a corrupt system. He found that person in the most unlikely place. The Bitter Creek Saloon was a rough establishment that catered to ranch hands and drifters. The air smelled of stale beer and tobacco. Sam pushed through the doors and scanned the room. At a back table sat a man he had heard about but never met. Edgar Whittaker, lawyer, drunk, brilliant legal mind slowly being pickled in whiskey. Sam walked to the table and sat down uninvited. Whittaker looked up, his eyes red-rimmed but sharp. "I know you. You are the fool standing between Voss and what he wants. I am the fool who found proof Voss filed a fraudulent land claim." Whittaker's eyebrows rose. "Did you now? And what do you want me to do about it?" "Represent Mrs. Ashford, file an injunction, get that murder warrant thrown out." Whittaker laughed. It was a bitter sound. "You think I can win against Voss? The man owns every judge within 200 miles. Not every judge. And if we can prove Morrison is compromised, we can get the case moved to territorial court." Whittaker leaned forward, suddenly interested. "What kind of proof?" Sam told him about the ledgers, about Morrison's cover-up, about the blackmail that had been going on for 5 years. When he finished, Whittaker sat back, his expression thoughtful. "That is good, real good. But even with that, it is a long shot. Voss has resources, connections. He will fight dirty." "So will we." Whittaker studied Sam for a long moment. Then he drained his glass and stood. "All right, I will take the case. But I need something from you first." "What?" "The truth. Did Joe Ashford kill her husband?" Sam met his eyes. "Frank Ashford died in a fight. Joe defended herself. That is not murder, that is survival." "Can you prove it?" "We have a witness, a girl named Abby who saw the bruises, and Mrs. Brennan will testify about the injuries Frank inflicted." Whittaker nodded slowly. "Then we have a chance. Small, but real." They shook hands. As Sam turned to leave, Whittaker called after him, "Calloway, be careful. Voss does not like losing, and when he feels cornered, he stops playing by any rules at all." Sam rode back to the homestead as the sun set. He found Joe in the barn tending to the horses. She looked up as he entered, her expression wary. "We have a lawyer, Edgar Whittaker. He is taking the case." Joe sagged with relief. "How much does he want?" "Nothing until we win. He is doing this because he hates Voss. Apparently Voss got his brother killed 10 years ago in a range war. Whittaker has been looking for a way to strike back ever since. So we are a weapon, a way for him to get revenge. Does it matter, as long as he fights for us?" Joe considered that. Then she nodded. "I suppose not." Sam hesitated, then spoke the words that had been burning in his mind since dawn. "Joe, that cellar yesterday, when we were hiding, you said we were alive and that was what mattered. You said we, not I." Joe's hand stilled on the curry brush. "I did." "Did you mean it?" She turned to face him. In the dim light of the barn, her face was all shadows and uncertainty. But when she spoke, her voice was steady. "Yes, I meant it." Sam crossed the space between them, not touching, not yet, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him. "I am not good at this, at talking about feelings, but I need you to know. When I kissed you, it was not just strategy. It was not just impulse. It was real." Joe's breath caught. "Sam, you do not have to say anything. You do not have to feel the same way. I just needed you to know." For a long moment they stood in the charged silence. Then Joe did something that surprised them both. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand was rough with calluses, but her touch was gentle, tentative, as if she were learning a new language. "I am broken," she whispered. "Frank broke me in ways I do not think can be fixed. You are not broken. You are battered. There is a difference." "Is there?" "Broken things cannot be used. Battered things have character, history, strength earned through surviving." Joe's eyes filled with tears. "I want to believe that." "Then believe it." "I do." She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. They stood that way for a long time, breathing together, learning the shape of each other's pain. Finally Joe pulled back. "We should go inside. Abby will have dinner ready." "In a minute." Sam pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her. She stiffened at first, every instinct screaming danger, but he just held her. No demands, no expectations, just presence and warmth and safety. Slowly, Joe's muscles relaxed. She let herself lean into him, let herself be held. And for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel like she was facing the world alone. The next week passed in a blur of preparation. Whitaker filed the injunction and got a court date set for 2 weeks out. Mrs. Brennan provided the ledgers showing Morrison's corruption. The evidence was damning enough that the territorial governor agreed to send an outside judge to hear the case. But Voss was not idle. 3 more homesteads near Joe's land were attacked. Barns burned, fences cut, cattle scattered. The message was clear: cross Voss and suffer. But something unexpected happened. Instead of giving up, people started fighting back. Men who had been too scared to stand alone found courage in numbers. Women who had been silent for years began speaking up. The territory had lived under Voss's thumb for too long, and Joe's refusal to bend had given others permission to stand tall. A week before the court date, Sheriff Wade rode out to the homestead alone. He looked tired, old. His face was lined with something that might have been regret. "I am not here to arrest you," he said when Joe and Sam met him in the yard. "I am here to warn you." "About what?" Sam asked. "Voss knows he is going to lose in court. The evidence is too strong. The outside judge cannot be bought, so he is planning something. I do not know what, but he told Miller to handle it, and when Voss tells Miller to handle something, people die." Joe stepped forward. "Why are you telling us this?" Wade looked at her, really looked at her. "Because I am tired. Tired of being Voss's dog. Tired of enforcing laws I know are wrong. Tired of watching decent people suffer while men like Voss get richer off their pain." He reached into his coat and pulled out his badge. He looked at it for a long moment, then held it out to Sam. "I am done. I quit. And I am sorry. For everything. For the things I did and the things I did not do. For all of it." Sam took the badge. "What will you do?" "Drift, I guess. Maybe head west. Find a place where nobody knows my name. Start over if that is even possible at my age." Wade turned his horse and rode away. They watched him go, the man who had been their enemy, now just another broken soul, trying to find redemption. That night Sam and Joe sat on the porch. The moon was nearly full, painting the snow silver. Everything was quiet, too quiet. "Something is coming," Joe said. "I know. Maybe we should run. Take Abby and go while we still can." Sam shook his head. "Running does not solve anything. It just moves the problem. We stay. We fight. We finish this." Joe looked at him. "Why? Why risk your life for a piece of land that is not even yours?" "Because it is not about the land anymore. It is about you, about Abby, about every person in this territory who has been too scared to stand up to Voss. Someone has to draw a line and say enough. Might as well be us." Joe was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that surprised both of them. "I love you." Sam went very still. "What?" "I love you. I do not know when it happened. Maybe when you came back from Clearwater, when you could have kept riding. Maybe when you stood between me and Wade. Maybe it has been happening this whole time so slowly I did not notice, but I love you, and I needed to say it, in case tomorrow goes badly." Sam turned to look at her. In the moonlight her face was beautiful, not in the conventional way, but in the way weathered stone is beautiful, strong, permanent, shaped by forces that would have destroyed something weaker. "I love you too," he said. "Have since the night you dragged me out of that storm and threatened me with an axe." Despite everything, Joe laughed. It was a real laugh, full and genuine. Sam kissed her, and this time it was not desperate or stolen. It was a promise, a vow, a declaration that whatever came next, they would face it together. The attack came 2 nights before the court date. Sam woke to the sound of breaking glass. He was on his feet in seconds, gun in hand. Another crash. Someone was throwing rocks through the windows. "Joe, Abby, get down!" They scrambled for cover as more glass shattered. Then a voice called from outside. "Calloway, you and the freak want to fight. Come on out and fight." Sam recognized the voice. Miller. And he was not alone. Sam could hear multiple men moving around the house surrounding it. "We are not coming out," Sam yelled. "Then we are coming in." The front door exploded inward, the lock shattered by a rifle butt. 3 men poured through. Sam fired once, twice. 1 man went down screaming. The other 2 dove for cover. But more men were coming through the back door. The windows. They had planned this. A full assault. Overwhelming force. Sam fought like a demon. He fired until the Colt was empty, then swung it like a club. Joe was beside him, using the Winchester like a spear, driving the stock into faces and ribs. Abby huddled in the corner screaming. They were losing. There were too many. Sam took a hit to the ribs that drove the air from his lungs. Joe caught a fist to the jaw that snapped her head back. They went down together, overwhelmed by numbers. Miller stood over them, breathing hard. His face was bleeding from where Sam had hit him. He smiled, and it was a terrible smile. "Voss sends his regards. He said to make sure you understood. Nobody crosses him. Nobody." He raised his boot, preparing to stomp on Sam's head. Then the door burst open again. But this time it was not more of Miller's men. It was the women. Mrs. Brennan, Mrs. Chen, Miss Porter. Behind them a dozen more. Women from town, from neighboring homesteads, armed with rifles, shotguns, cast iron pans, anything they could grab. And behind the women came the men, farmers who had stayed silent for years, ranch hands who had worked for Voss until their conscience would not let them anymore. Even the reverend from town carrying his Bible in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "Drop your weapons," Mrs. Brennan said. She had a double-barreled shotgun pointed at Miller's chest. "Now." Miller looked around, looked at the crowd, looked at the determination on their faces. He dropped his rifle. His men followed suit. "Now get out," Mrs. Brennan said. "Go back to Voss. Tell him his reign is over. Tell him this territory is done being afraid." Miller and his men stumbled out into the night. The crowd watched them go, then turned to help Sam and Joe to their feet. "How did you know?" Joe asked, her voice shaking. "Wade came through town tonight," Mrs. Brennan said. "Told everyone what was going to happen. Said it was time we all made a choice. Stand with you or live on our knees the rest of our lives. Looks like we chose." Joe looked at the faces surrounding her. People she had thought hated her. People she had thought would celebrate her destruction. But they had come. When it mattered most, they had come. She started to cry. Not quiet tears this time, but deep, wrenching sobs. Years of pain and loneliness and fear pouring out. Sam held her as she broke apart, and the women surrounded them both, a wall of solidarity and strength. 2 days later, they stood in the territorial courthouse. The room was packed, every seat filled, people standing along the walls. The whole territory had turned out to watch. The judge, a stern man named Thaddeus Moore from the Capitol, called the court to order. He listened to the evidence, the fraudulent land claim, the forged signature, the blackmail that had compromised Judge Morrison, Mrs. Brennan's testimony about the abuse, Abby's trembling statement about the bruises she had seen. When it was all presented, Judge Moore looked at Clayton Voss. "Mr. Voss, the evidence against you is overwhelming. Fraud, conspiracy, attempted murder. I am issuing a warrant for your arrest. Sheriff Wade's badge has been surrendered, so I am appointing a territorial marshal to take you into custody." Voss stood, his face purple with rage. "You cannot do this. I own this territory." "You owned it," Judge Moore corrected. "Not anymore." 2 marshals moved forward. Voss struggled, but they cuffed him and led him away. As he passed Joe, he spat at her feet. "This is not over." "Yes," Joe said quietly. "It is." The judge then turned to the matter of Frank Ashford's death. "Mrs. Ashford, please take the stand." Joe stood on shaking legs. As she walked to the witness chair, she felt every eye in the room on her. Voss's lawyer, a man named Darrow, approached with a predatory smile. "Mrs. Ashford, Your husband died under suspicious circumstances. You claim self-defense, yet you are a woman of considerable physical strength. Is it not true you could have simply restrained him rather than allowing him to die?" Joe's voice was steady. "I tried to restrain him for 3 years. It did not work. But on that night, he came at me with a weapon. We fought. He fell. I watched him bleed because I was terrified that if I helped him, he would get up and finish what he started." Darrow opened his mouth to continue, but Judge Moore raised a hand. "Mr. Darrow, I have heard enough. I have Mrs. Brennan's testimony about years of documented abuse. I have this young girl's witness statement." He gestured to Abby. "And I have something else." He held up Constance Merrick's ledger open to a damning page. "I have proof that Frank Ashford was already under a death sentence, paid for by his own sister. Mrs. Ashford did not commit murder. She survived an attack from a man who was himself marked for execution by criminal conspiracy." The courtroom erupted in whispers. "Mrs. Ashford," Judge Moore said, his voice cutting through the noise, "it is the finding of this court that you acted in lawful defense of your own life against an assailant who had been abusing you for years. The charges are dismissed. You are free to go." The courtroom erupted in applause. Joe sagged against Sam, relief washing over her like a wave. It was done. Finally, blessedly done. 6 months later, the homestead had been transformed. The barn stood straight and strong, a new roof gleaming in the sun. The fences were tight, the cattle healthy, the garden flourishing. Joe stood in the doorway of the house watching Sam and Abby work together to fix the chicken coop. The girl was laughing at something Sam had said, her young face bright with joy. Joe's hand moved to her stomach. Still flat, but not for much longer. She had told Sam about the baby last week. He had cried, actual tears of happiness. Then he had proposed properly with a ring he had carved from a horseshoe nail. They had married in front of the whole town. Mrs. Brennan had officiated. Even former Sheriff Wade had come riding in from wherever he had been drifting. He had shaken Sam's hand and asked Joe for forgiveness. She had given it. Now, standing in the doorway of her home, Joe felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not the frightened peace of hiding, but the earned peace of someone who had fought and won. Sam looked up and caught her watching. He smiled, and it was a smile full of warmth and promise. He said something to Abby, who giggled, then walked toward Joe. When he reached her, he wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hand resting on her stomach. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that something good came from something so terrible." "That is life. Bad things happen. Good things happen. Sometimes they are connected in ways we do not see until later." Joe leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of him. "I am glad you fell off your horse in my yard." Sam laughed. "So am I. Best accident I ever had." They stood that way for a long time, watching Abby chase chickens, watching the sun paint the sky gold and red, watching their future take shape before them. Later that evening, after Abby had gone to bed in the room they had built for her in the expanded house, Sam and Joe sat on the porch. The same porch where they had first kissed, where they had made their stand. "I have been thinking about names," Sam said, "for the baby." "Have you?" "If it is a girl, I thought maybe Clara, after my daughter who died." Joe smiled. "I think that would be perfect. And if it is a boy?" "I was thinking Frank." Joe went rigid. "What?" Sam took her hand. "Not to honor him, to reclaim it, to take that name and give it to a child who will be raised with love and kindness, who will grow up knowing that strength does not mean cruelty, that a man can be gentle and still be strong. We take that name and we make it mean something good." Joe thought about that, about the power of reclaiming something that had been used to hurt her, turning it into something beautiful. "All right," she said. "Frank or Clara. Either way, they will know they are loved. More than loved, wanted, cherished, protected. By both of us. By both of us." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. The land stretched out before them, hard and unforgiving and beautiful. the same land that had tested them, broken them, and ultimately made them stronger. Joe thought about all the things she had survived: the abuse, the isolation, the fear, the fight for her home and her dignity. She thought about the woman she had been scared and alone building walls to keep the world out. And she thought about the woman she was now, still strong, still tough, but no longer alone. She squeezed Sam's hand. He squeezed back. They had won. Not just the court case or the land or the right to stay. They had won something much more important. They had won each other. And in the harsh territory of Wyoming in 1872, that was everything. 5 years later, the homestead was unrecognizable from the struggling, broken-down place Sam had first stumbled into. 2 new barns stood sturdy and painted. 6 small cabins dotted the property homes for the women who had come seeking shelter and found community. A schoolhouse had been built where Abby, now 19, taught reading to children and adults alike. The original cabin had been expanded into a proper house with real glass windows and a wide porch that wrapped around 3 sides. In the yard, 2 children played: Clara, age 4, and young Frank, age 2. They chased chickens and laughed, their voices carrying across the land. Joe stood on that porch, her hair streaked with gray, now watching her children play. Sam came up behind her, moving slower these days. His leg had never quite healed right from the fight with Miller's men, leaving him with a permanent limp, but he wore it like a badge of honor. "Thinking about the old days?" he asked. "Always. Sometimes I can still feel it, the fear, the loneliness. Then I look at this." She gestured to the children, the buildings, the community they had built. "And I remember that the worst days of my life led to the best. No regrets. Only one, that I did not fight back sooner, that I wasted 3 years being afraid." Sam kissed her temple. "You were not wasting time. You were surviving. That is never a waste." A wagon rolled into the yard. Mrs. Brennan, older now but still fierce, climbed down with a basket of fresh bread. Behind her wagon came another and another. It was Sunday, the day they all gathered for supper and shared stories. Soon the yard was full of people. Families who had found the courage to stand up to tyrants, women who had escaped bad situations and found safety, men who had learned that true strength was measured in compassion, not cruelty. They ate together at long tables set up in the yard. They laughed and argued and planned for the future. This was what Joe had built, not just a homestead, but a home, a place where the broken could heal and the scared could be brave. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of fire, Sam raised his glass. "To Joe," he said, "the landowner who refused to be moved." "To Joe," everyone echoed. Joe stood, tears in her eyes. "No, to all of us. Because none of this was possible alone. We stood together. We fought together. We survived together. That is what matters." They drank. They celebrated. And as the stars came out, the children ran through the yard, their laughter echoing into the night. Joe watched it all. Sam's hand warm in hers, and thought about the night he had stumbled into her life. Broken and bleeding and lost. 2 damaged people finding each other in a storm. She thought about what she would tell that terrified woman from 5 years ago, the one who held an axe and threatened a stranger because she had forgotten how to trust. She would tell her this: "The hard times do not last forever. The walls you build to protect yourself can also become your prison, and sometimes the thing you fear most turns out to be the thing that saves you." But mostly, she would tell her to hold on, to keep fighting, because on the other side of fear and pain and struggle, there is a life worth living, a family worth protecting, a love worth fighting for. And when you get there, when you finally stand in the light after years of darkness, you will understand that every scar, every tear, every moment you wanted to give up but did not was worth it. Because you are not just surviving anymore. You are living, and that makes all the difference.